Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., he arrives. His boots are worn, his vest is faded, and his back slightly hunched from years of hard labor. He carries a battered broom and a quiet presence. Some call him Old Man Walt. Most just call him Asterisk, the janitor. Asterisk, in this small, tight-knit town where everyone knows everyone, or thinks they do, Walter Hale is invisible. People walk past him like he's part of the pavement. Some teenagers whisper jokes as they pass. Betty flunked out of high school, one says. Why is he always staring at the ground? Another laughs. To the townsfolk, Walter is the definition of nobody, a ghost in plain sight. But here's the thing about ghosts. They usually have stories. Walter didn't seem to mind the way people looked at him, or didn't look at all. He swept the streets as if they were sacred, like each fallen leaf mattered. He greeted everyone politely, even those who ignored him. No one had ever seen him angry. No one had ever seen him take a day off, either. The local bakery owner, Mrs. Delgado, once tried giving him a free coffee. He smiled, tipped his hat, and gently declined. Let it go to someone who needs it more, he said with a soft voice that carried something old, like a memory. People made assumptions, probably made bad choices. Maybe prison time. Couldn't have been much of anything. But if anyone had really looked, they would have noticed his hands. Calloused, yes, but steady, strong, precise. The kind of hands that don't just sweep sidewalks, the kind that once saved lives. It was a chilly October morning when things began to change. Walter was sweeping near the bus stop when a man collapsed mid-stride, face first into the concrete. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Someone called 911. Others froze in panic. But not Walter. He dropped his broom and rushed to the man's side. Without hesitation, he checked the pulse, looked at the pupils, cleared the airway. CPR began. 1, 2, 3, 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Repeat. Do something, someone yelled. He was doing everything. By the time paramedics arrived, Walter had stabilized the man's breathing. They took over, but one EMT paused, eyeing Walter carefully. Where'd you learn to do that? He asked. Walter only shrugged. Long time ago. The crowd slowly dispersed. Some clapped. Others looked confused. Mrs. Delgado watched from her shop window, her coffee untouched. That night, she couldn't sleep. There was something in Walter's eyes she hadn't seen before. Purpose, precision, pain. The next few days were different. People started noticing the janitor. A post about the incident went up on the local Facebook group. Old street sweeper saves man with heart attack, like a pro. Who is he? Speculation buzzed. Rumors flew, but Walter remained the same. Still sweeping, still silent, still a mystery. That's when Kevin, a curious college student studying journalism, decided to dig deeper. He spent hours online, searching, cross-referencing. Finally, he stumbled across something that made his jaw drop. A photograph. A much younger Walter Hale, standing tall in scrubs, arms crossed beside a team of surgeons. The caption, Dr. Walter Hale, Chief of Trauma Surgery, St. Mary's Medical Center, NYC. Kevin didn't sleep that night. By morning, he was at the bakery with his laptop open, waiting for Walter to pass by. Mr. Hale, Kevin called out. Walter paused, visibly confused. No one had called him that in years. I found something. About you. About who you were, Kevin stammered. Walter sighed. Deep. Heavy. I'm not that man anymore, he said quietly. But you were, and people deserve to know. Walter looked at Kevin, long and hard. Then, for the first time, he sat down, right there on the bakery's front bench. What followed was not a dramatic reveal, not a confession. Just a man telling a story he'd buried beneath years of silence. Yes, he had been a trauma surgeon. A good one. Some called him a miracle worker. He had saved countless lives. But one night, a misdiagnosis, a rush of judgment, a missed detail, and a young mother died. It wasn't even my patient, he said, staring into his coffee. But I took the call. I made the call, and I couldn't live with that. So he left. Not forced, not disgrace. Just gone. A brilliant doctor disappearing into obscurity. Not because he was ruined, but because he couldn't forgive himself. By the end of that week, Kevin's article went viral. The janitor with a surgeon's hands. The true story of Walter Hale. Local news picked it up. Then national news. People began approaching Walter with respect, gratitude. Even former patients who'd somehow tracked him down sent letters. But Walter remained unchanged. He still woke at 5 a.m., still swept the streets, still tipped his hat with a soft smile. When asked why he didn't return to medicine, he said, "Some people save lives in surgery. Some save them on the street. I've done both. This one's quieter, but no less important." And so, every morning at 6 a.m., Walter Hale arrives. His vest still faded, his boots still worn. But now people see him. They wave. They smile. Some even bring coffee, because they've learned that beneath the dust, the dirt, the silence, there's a story. And in that story, a man who once held a scalpel now holds a broom. Both, in his hands, are instruments of healing. And he was never a nobody. Not for a second. Before he was a quiet janitor with a broom, Walter Hale stood under fluorescent lights, wearing a crisp pair of surgical scrubs and a name badge that read, Dr. Walter Hale, Chief of Trauma Surgery. He wasn't just a doctor. He was the doctor, the kind of surgeon people called when there were only seconds left to save a life. The one who walked into emergency rooms like a storm, focused, precise, unstoppable. Nurses said his hands were like magic. Colleagues said he was a machine. Patients, well, most of them were asleep when he saved them, but their families would cry and say things like, "He's an angel in human form." At the peak of his career, Walter had everything. He lived in a Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park. He drove a silver BMW. He'd been on medical panels, written published research, and received a humanitarian award from the state governor. But you know what they say. The higher you climb, the harder you fall. Walter's life started to crack not because he failed at surgery, but because of something deeper, a moment of hesitation, a human moment in a world where there's no room for human error. It was a Thursday night in late November, cold, windy, and unusually busy at the hospital. Walter had already worked a double shift. His eyes burned. His back ached. He was minutes from heading home when the call came over the radio. Multiple car collision. 2 adults, 1 child. ETA 5 minutes. Without hesitation, Walter scrubbed back in. The woman who arrived on the stretcher, Rachel Morris, 29, was unconscious, bleeding internally, and rapidly losing oxygen. The other surgeon on call was new. Panicked, Walter took charge. Scans were rushed. Blood bags ordered. And then came the decision point. Operate now without a full picture, or wait for imaging and risk the bleed worsening. Walter made the call. He went in. At first, it looked like the right move. But hidden deep behind the liver was a ruptured artery, one they hadn't spotted in time. By the time it was discovered, it was too late. She coded on the table. They tried everything. Shock, fluids, chest compressions. But the monitor flatlined. Rachel Morris died at 10:47 p.m. Walter stood still for a long time after that. Long enough that the surgical team grew quiet. Long enough that a nurse gently touched his arm and whispered, "Dr. Hale, it's okay." But it wasn't, because Walter knew something nobody else in that room knew. He recognized her name, Rachel Morris. She had been his patient 3 weeks earlier for a minor condition. At that time, she confided in him about anxiety, about how scared she was to leave her young son without a mom. He remembered the way she'd looked at him and said, "I trust you with my life." And now she was gone, because of a choice he made, a choice he couldn't take back. The official report cleared him of wrongdoing. There was no malpractice, no negligence. The trauma team backed him up. The chief of medicine told him to take a few days off. But Walter didn't take days off. He walked away. For good. No press release. No farewell speech. No dramatic meltdown. He packed a bag, donated his luxury suits, signed over his apartment, and disappeared. He left behind everything. His job, his title, his reputation. Walter resurfaced months later in a town no one would associate with a top surgeon. No one recognized him in a little neighborhood where he applied for a custodial job. He didn't lie about his past. He just never brought it up. He said he liked working outdoors, liked the quiet. The city officials didn't ask questions. They were short on staff and needed a street sweeper. And just like that, Dr. Walter Hale became Walt the janitor. But make no mistake, the doctor never disappeared. He didn't wear a lab coat anymore, but the instinct to help, to fix, to care, that never went away. When kids scraped their knees near the park, Walter was the first one to help. When an elderly man fell on the sidewalk, Walter tied a splint from his own jacket. When a stray dog was hit by a car, Walter stopped traffic, scooped the dog into his arms, and stayed by its side until the vet arrived. He didn't need a hospital to save lives. He just needed opportunity. And deep down, Walter knew what he was doing. He was making penance. Quietly, one act of kindness at a time. One evening, sitting on a park bench, Walter ran into a little boy who looked strangely familiar. The boy was chasing a balloon, laughing. His grandmother called out, "Come back here, Liam." And that's when it hit him. Liam Morris, Rachel's son, the woman he lost that night. This was her boy. Walter didn't move. He just watched. His throat tightened. His hands trembled. But he didn't approach. He didn't speak. Some ghosts don't want to be seen. They just want to make sure the people they couldn't save are still okay. And so, the ghost of a surgeon lives on in plain sight, not in hospitals or journals, but in alleyways and sidewalks, in quiet streets before dawn, in every piece of litter he picks up, in every stranger he helps. Walter Hale no longer wears gloves and a mask, but he still heals, still saves, still remembers, because some wounds don't bleed on the outside, and some doctors never stop treating them. Moral of the story? Never judge a man by the job he does. Judge him by the heart he carries. And sometimes the ones who fall in the hardest are the ones who rise to become the most humble healers of all. For most people, cleaning the streets is just a job. For Walter Hale, it was a sentence and a salvation. You'd see him early each morning, just after fog lifted, walking down Elm Street in his orange vest, pushing a broom like it held the weight of his past. Most folks passed him without a second glance. Kids avoided him, thinking he was just another grumpy old man. Adults offered half smiles, if anything at all. But to Walter, each speck of dust on the sidewalk was a reminder of the one thing he couldn't clean up, his own mistake. It had been 5 years since Walter walked away from the operating table. Once hailed as one of New York's top trauma surgeons, he had everything a man could want: recognition, wealth, purpose. He had saved more lives than he could count. But one night, just one night, he made a call he couldn't undo. He'd lost a patient, Rachel Morris, a young mother, 30 years old. She'd trusted him, smiled through her anxiety, and put her life in his hands. And he failed. The official report said it wasn't his fault. But Walter knew better. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't lazy. He was tired. And when you're a trauma surgeon, tired can be deadly. He took a calculated risk, one that cost Rachel her life. And from that moment on, he didn't want the title. He didn't want the praise. He just wanted to make it right. So he left. He gave up the city, the penthouse, the plaques on the wall, moved to a small town where no one would know his name, changed his number, deleted social media, disappeared from the medical world like he'd never existed. He found work with the city's public works department, street sanitation. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who once sterilized scalpels now sterilized sidewalks. But that's what he wanted. Every morning, Walter swept the streets, not just for cleanliness, but for penance. To him, every cigarette butt he removed, every leaf he pushed into his dustpan, was a small, quiet apology to the life he couldn't save. One particular winter morning, Walter paused in front of a mural painted on the side of the old library. It was of a tree, tall and colorful, with words surrounding it. No act of kindness is ever wasted. He stared at it longer than usual. His gloved hands clutched the broom tighter. because for a long time he didn't believe that. He believed some mistakes were too big to be forgiven. That one mistake defined you forever. But day after day, he kept coming back, because while he couldn't erase what happened, maybe, just maybe, he could balance the scales. And then came the boy, Evan. He was 10, with a busted sneaker and a curious stare. One day, he watched Walter sweep in front of the schoolyard. The next day, he showed up again. Then again. Finally, Walter asked, "Why you watching me, kid?" Evan shrugged. "You sweep like a ninja." Walter chuckled, a sound he hadn't made in months. The boy kept coming back. Eventually, Walter let him try the broom, taught him how to line the bristles just right, how to push instead of drag. They didn't talk much. But Evan always had questions. Were you always a janitor? Why do you wear gloves if it's not that cold? Do you like sweeping, or is it just your job? Walter answered what he could, dodged what he couldn't. But one day, Evan said something that stopped him cold. "You're not just cleaning. You're fixing stuff, huh?" Walter looked at the boy. "What makes you say that?" "Dunno." Evan shrugged. "You do it like it matters, like it's important." Walter didn't speak. His throat tightened. Maybe someone was finally starting to see him, not for who he had been, but for why he was still here. Word slowly spread in town. A local shop owner mentioned that the quiet janitor guy helped her fix a broken fuse box. A librarian said he saw Walter tending to a wounded stray cat behind the building. Someone said they caught him quietly leaving groceries on the porch of a single mother's home. And when an old man collapsed at the park, Walter didn't hesitate. He called out for someone to dial 911, then checked the man's breathing, gently tilted his head back, and performed CPR with calm precision. He saved the man's life before the ambulance even arrived. A woman in the crowd whispered, "Where'd he learn to do that?" Walter said nothing. He simply picked up his broom and kept sweeping. Eventually, Evan's mom, Sarah, approached him. She was a nurse. She recognized the way Walter had handled the emergency, the steps, the timing, the muscle memory. "You're not just a janitor, are you?" she asked gently. Walter sighed. "I used to be a surgeon." Silence. "Then why this?" she asked. He paused, eyes down before quietly replying. "I made a mistake, a big one. This is my way of trying to live with it." She didn't push for details. She just said, "For what it's worth, my son thinks you're a hero." Walter didn't reply. But that night he cried, for the first time in years. Walter never went back to being a doctor. He didn't want to. But the town began to see him as more than a broom and a vest. People said hello. Some stopped to talk. Others brought him coffee. Not because of pity, but because they finally understood. Sometimes the people who look the most ordinary carry the heaviest burdens. And sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause or awards. It comes in quiet mornings, in small deeds, in the choice to keep going when it's easier to give up. Walter Hale kept sweeping, not because he had to, but because he needed to, and every street he cleaned brought him one step closer to peace. Moral of the story? It's not about erasing the past. It's about choosing to make the day count, one quiet act at a time. There are moments in life when silence becomes too loud to ignore. And for Walter Hale, the man everyone called just a janitor, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday, in the middle of the town's busiest street. For years, Walter swept sidewalks, collected trash, and scrubbed benches while the world moved around him. People chatting on their phones, rushing to work, sipping overpriced coffee. He wore his orange vest like armor and kept his head down. He never expected gratitude. He certainly didn't seek attention. He just wanted peace. But peace is a funny way of running away when the truth decides to show up. It started with a car accident. A young woman, no more than 25, was trapped in a crumpled sedan after a delivery truck ran a red light. People screamed, someone yelled for help, and the crowd began to gather. But no one moved, except Walter. Without hesitation, he ran toward the car, dropping his broom on the wet pavement. The windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks. The airbags deployed. The girl inside was fading fast, her breathing shallow, eyes fluttering. Walter didn't blink. He checked her vitals, stabilized her head, and whispered calmly, "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." Someone called 911, but Walter had already gone into full surgeon mode, his movement precise, his voice steady. It was like watching an orchestra conductor with invisible instruments. When the paramedics arrived, they froze for a second. One of them, Kyle, knew Walter. He had seen him sweeping the school steps. But today, he looked different, authoritative, focused, in control. After handing off the girls safely, Walter picked up his broom, nodded at the crowd, and started to walk away, like nothing had happened. But this time, people noticed. By evening, the whole town was talking. "Did you hear about the janitor who saved that girl? Someone said he used to be a doctor." "No way. That guy barely talks." At first, it was just rumors, speculation. But then a local blogger dug a little deeper, found an old article from the New York Times. "Miracle surgeon saves 14 in Bronx hospital mass casualty case." The name, Walter Hale. And just like that, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The next morning, Walter came to work like usual. Same vest, same broom, same quiet presence. But the town had changed. People stared. Some nodded. Others approached. "Mr. Hale, is it true? Were you really a doctor? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Walter didn't know how to answer. For so long, he believed silence was safer than truth, that humility was better than attention. But now, the very thing he ran from was standing in front of him, asking for explanation, for honesty, for the story behind the man. So that afternoon, he sat down with Sarah, the nurse who had always been kind, and the mother of Evan, the boy who once called Walter a ninja with a broom. They met at the community center, where a small group of neighbors had gathered. No microphones, no podium, just folding chairs and curiosity. Walter took a breath, looked at the floor, then looked up. "I wasn't always a janitor," he said. And for the next 30 minutes, Walter Hale shared what he had never said out loud since the day he left his old life behind. He told him about Rachel Morris, the young woman whose death broke him, about the 36-hour shift that led to one missed sign, one poor decision, about the night he sat in the hospital parking lot, staring at his shaking hands, wondering if he even deserved to be called a doctor anymore. He told them how he walked away from medicine, from his name, from everything. "But I didn't come here to hide," he said. "I came here to heal, not just myself, but in some way I hope maybe I could still do good, even if it was just keeping your sidewalks clean." There was silence. Then someone clapped, and then another, and then the whole room stood up, not out of pity, but because they had finally seen the full picture, not just a quiet man with the broom, but the man behind the broom. In the following weeks, everything changed, yet Walter stayed the same. The mayor offered him a civic award. He declined. A journalist offered to write a profile. He said no thanks. The hospital in the city asked if he'd consider teaching part-time. He politely refused. But what he did accept was respect. People no longer looked through him. Kids waved as he passed. Store owners brought him coffee. Parents pointed him out to their children as an example, not because he was perfect, but because he had the courage to change. And one day, Evan asked, "Mr. Walter, if you're a hero, why do you still clean?" Walter smiled. "Because being useful," he said, "never goes out of style." Sometimes, people think redemption comes in a single dramatic act, a confession, a headline, a tearful speech. But for Walter Hale, it came slowly, one sidewalk at a time, one quiet morning after another, until the world finally realized he wasn't just sweeping the streets. He was sweeping away the shame. He was making space for dignity, for growth, for truth. It was a warm Saturday morning in May, and the town square was already alive. Kids chasing bubbles, vendors setting up their stalls, and neighbors chatting over coffee. Among them, as always, was Walter Hale. Orange vest, straw broom, quiet demeanor. But something was different. People didn't just pass him by anymore. They greeted him, respected him. And for the first time in years, Walter began to feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: peace. The journey had been long. The shadows had been deep. But somehow, one small act of bravery, saving a young woman from a car wreck, had pulled the curtains back on a truth the world never expected. Their quiet janitor had once been a brilliant surgeon. And now, after all the whispers, interviews, and community meetings, the town had chosen not to condemn his past, but to honor the strength it took to carry it. That morning, something else unusual happened. A teenage boy named Tyler approached Walter at the bus stop. "Hey, Mr. Hale, can I ask you something?" Walter looked up, smiled softly. "Of course." Tyler hesitated. "Do you ever regret walking away from being a doctor?" Walter leaned on his broom and thought for a long moment. "Every day and never at all," he finally said. Tyler looked confused. Walter chuckled. "It's complicated, kid. Saving lives was the greatest thing I ever did, and the hardest thing I ever lost. But sometimes redemption doesn't look like going back. Sometimes it looks like doing the next right thing, even if that means picking up trash instead of scalpel." Tyler nodded. "That's kind of deep." Walter winked. "You'll get there." That same week, the city council announced something surprising. They were renaming a part of the community park. The small garden near the library where Walter often swept and watered the flowers. It would now be called Hale's Garden. At first, Walter protested. "I'm just a janitor," he insisted. But Councilwoman Rose Morales looked him square in the eye and said, "No, Walter, you're a reminder that we all deserve a second chance, that who we are today matters more than the mistakes we made yesterday." It was the first time Walter cried in public. Over the next few months, the garden transformed. With Walter's guidance, volunteers planted roses, sunflowers, and lilacs. Kids painted signs with quotes about kindness and courage. And people came, not just to see the flowers, but to hear his story. He became a quiet mentor to young people in the neighborhood, especially to one girl, Anita, a shy 15-year-old whose mother had been battling cancer. She sat with him on the garden bench one afternoon and whispered, "I heard you used to save people. Why did you stop?" Walter took a deep breath and told her the truth, the whole truth, about the patient he lost, about the guilt that broke him, about the sleepless nights and the decision to disappear, and about how, even after losing his white coat, he never stopped trying to be of service. "Sometimes we don't get to fix what we broke," he said gently, "but we still get to show up. We still get to be good." Anita looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You're still saving people, you know, just in a different way." Walter blinked hard to keep his own tears back. "Thank you," he whispered. Soon after, something remarkable happened. A man named Dr. Collins, a senior faculty member from a prestigious medical school, came to visit Hale's Garden. He had read about Walter in a feature story that went viral on social media. "I had to see this place with my own eyes," he said, "and meet the man who reminded the world that medicine is about the heart, not just the hands." He asked Walter if he would be willing to speak to a class of medical students, not teach surgery, but to talk about humility, mistakes, and emotional cost of saving lives. Walter hesitated. He had vowed never to step into anything resembling his old life. But Collins smiled. "You wouldn't be going back. You'd be guiding others forward." A month later, Walter stood in front of 70 bright-eyed students. He wore no lab coat, just his orange vest and a name tag that read, "Walter, Community Caretaker." And he told them his story, not with shame but with honesty. He spoke about ego, exhaustion, regret. He spoke about grief, forgiveness, and the long, slow work of rebuilding a life from the ground up. But most importantly, he spoke about grace. "I used to think being a doctor was about being perfect," he told them. "But now I know it's about being present, about being human." The room was silent. Then one student stood, then another, then all of them, offering the kind of applause that doesn't just come from admiration, but from deep respect. Back in his town, Walter kept sweeping. He didn't need a new title. He didn't want another degree. He had found a new purpose, one rooted in community, in simplicity, in love. And every time he passed the garden with his broom, he would pause for a second, take it all in. The flowers, the laughter, the life blooming from the soil. Because in the end, Walter Hale had taught everyone a powerful truth. You don't need to wear a white coat to make a difference. You just need to keep showing up. To the work, to the people, to yourself.